Fireflies and hot July nights. A delicious summer in the Great White North. It was late June 2020, and I had been in Canada since the previous September. Having arrived in the autumn, I had yet to experience a summer in the Great White North. The winter had been long. Although I had loved everything about it, the snow, the Christmas lights, the short days and cozy evenings, I wasn't yet accustomed to the length of a Canadian winter, and along with many others, I was ready for some warmth. As spring set in and critters came foraging, I started feeding a grey squirrel from my backyard window. I named him Turk, in honor of the many Turkish friends I'd made through online teaching. While Turk's presence on my windowsill was only due to cupboard love, I was quite happy to continue buying his affection. Soon a black squirrel appeared, capitalizing on the bounty I laid out for Turk every morning and afternoon. I named him Gorgeous George. Turk and George sent a few warning squeaks to each other as they crossed paths, one winning out before munching down on the windowsill platter, while the other yelled from a nearby tree. I'd wait for the victor to eat and leave before replenishing the snack bar. Soon the word was out, and a series of Turks and Georges descended on my window daily, chasing each other off with squeals and yells as I laid out handfuls of peanuts and sunflower seeds for the milling crowds. I didn't care how much it cost. They were my joy, and I was prepared to go without to keep them fed. Every so often, one would come to the window, find nothing, sit up on its hind legs, front paws together, and peer right at me as if to say, "Hey lady, the bar's empty. Where's the grub?" As a conglomerate of woodland creatures now owned me, I was pretty quick to meet their demands. Nothing made me smile as broadly as hearing the nibbling sounds of a ravenous squirrel. As my critters plumped up from the sparse winter, spring burst into summer, and the celebrations began, starting with Canada Day. July was upon us, and pandemic restrictions were easing. Canada's Independence Day came around, and I wasn't going to let it pass me by without celebration, as it would be my first. Two friends and I had been using my backyard to hang out all year, safely 6 feet apart. But we were able to inch a little closer now. I planned a barbecue and headed to my happy place, Dollarama, to splurge on decorations. Canadian flags, hanging lanterns, a moose crossing sign, and a painted beaver adorned the gazebo. Having also bought a red Canadian cowboy hat and a Canada 1867 t-shirt for the occasion, I donned my Texan cowboy boots and set up some music before my guests arrived. We dug into strawberry daiquiris and fired up the barbecue. Laughter filled the air as we enjoyed the festivities without the limitations and difficulties of the previous pandemic months. As evening set in, we lit a fire, cracked some cold beers, and waved a few hissing sparklers in the hot July night as the whiz-bang of nearby fireworks exploded around us. Sitting in the still of the summer evening with friends while watching the fireflies dart by, I remember feeling truly happy. A few days later, I was finally able to celebrate a summer birthday. Raised in the Southern Hemisphere, my birthday was always a winter event. As a child, my parties were often small, as my school friends were already off on their winter break vacations. In adulthood, celebrations had to be held indoors to shield from the cold and the rain. This year, my birthday would be warm and delicious. The day started perfectly at a dude ranch 30 minutes outside of the city, as a friend and I partook in one of my favorite things, spending time with horses. My love affair with the large animals started when I was a child and has not left me since. Straddling an exquisite palomino called Joker, we set out on our trail ride through the beautiful Ontario countryside. I was in heaven. A few hours later, I was seated at a wonderful restaurant with my two closest friends for a birthday dinner. Indoor dining had not yet resumed, but they had opened their patio, and it was here that we proceeded to have a lovely night filled with amazing food, a little champagne, and more laughter and joy than any of us could imagine. As I wandered happily through the gate into the backyard, turning towards my apartment, I stopped for a moment. It was the perfect July night, warm, with a multitude of lightning bugs celebrating their short lives by signaling to potential mates and dancing joyfully in the backyard. The moon was full, and the beauty of the evening brought me to tears as I drank in the deliciousness of fireflies and hot July nights. I crawled into bed a little tipsy, but very happy. In that moment, life was perfect. At the end of July, I was offered a trip to Bruce Lake in Muskoka to spend a few days with friends who owned a cabin on the lake. After 5 hours on the road, the little red car trundled down a dirt road and parked outside a wooden bungalow, surrounded by towering trees and the stillness you only find in the country. Bruce Lake is completely private and only accessible from the floating docks stretching out from these properties into the crystal blue water. It was here that I fell madly and instantly in love with a chipmunk. Having watched my merry band of squirrels, but never getting close enough to touch them, I was beyond ecstatic that this little fella allowed me to hand feed him. He was used to the locals that came and went, and despite being a little suspicious at first, the proffered almonds proved too much for him to resist, much to my delight. I support the buying of critter love by any means necessary and in any shape or form. Soon I met the squirrel who drove my host crazy. He had tried to burrow into the cabin the year before through the central air system's ducting, and she despised him. He was a wild Canadian creature, so I, of course, loved both him and his antics, despite scolding him severely when he drove off my little chipmunk. The first couple of days at the cabin had been sublime, and the weather incredible. The warm days allowed for a beautifully tepid lake as we splashed about in the water. On the third day, the rain set in, and the temperature dropped, creating another idyllic environment. A blazing fire heating friends in an old cabin in the woods. The night before we left, my friend and I built a fire on the bank of the lake as we huddled in our coats, drank a few beers, played a little music, and laughed uncontrollably while telling stories. I spent an hour lobbing peanut shells at my red squirrel friend, much like a quarterback to their star wide receiver. In true pro athlete form, he scooped them up with great skill and zigzagged his way to his hideaway before returning to a tree stump, awaiting the next nut to come winging his way. The evening was the perfect ending to a wonderful vacation and a great summer. As we loaded the car and headed out early the next morning, I was sad to return to reality. My first Canadian summer remains one of my favorite memories. And as I sit here in my homeland at the southernmost tip of Africa, I look forward to returning to the Great White North.